Thank you. Welcome. Glad to have you here today for us to discuss a responsible and more humane capitalism. We're going to have a broad conversation today, and the pandemic has shone a light on the societal and economic systems around the world, exposing some of the inequalities and flaws of today's capitalist society. It's also presented an opportunity, driving organizations, public and private, to reimagine the strategies and models toward more equitable and sustainable practices. I think some key questions. How could we rethink stakeholder values, and what does performance mean? Should we think about imposing incentives or penalties? What are the sustainable opportunities and catalysts for change? And what will be the role of technology enabling our future? At BMO, we have a purpose: to boldly grow the good in business and in life. Our purpose has been an anchor through the pandemic and guidepost to lay the foundation for a robust and inclusive recovery. Integrated, responsible, and sustainable capitalism is going to take collective action. We have the resources and the knowledge we will need to build it. But to get there, businesses will have to change how it understands its role in the world. I'm honored today to be joined by leaders who are accelerating this change journey. Bill McDermott, CEO of ServiceNow, Jose Minaya, CEO of Nuveen, and Manny, Maceda, Global Managing Partner of Bain Company. That's a lot for us to unpack over the next 45 minutes. Why don't we get the conversation going? Manny, I'll go to you first. As the definition of stakeholders has evolved beyond just shareholders, how have you, at the CEO of Bain Company, thought about your various stakeholders, and what actions have you taken?
Dan, thanks for having me, and I'm glad to be on this panel with Bill and Jose, such great organizations and leaders. You started the question, who are the stakeholders? Probably at its simplest right now for most commercial enterprises like ours. You start with your customers. In our case, we call them clients. You follow that with your people and your workforce. And then lastly are the communities around you. And I think what we've observed, and we've tried to live this as a company, I see your mission behind you, Dan, boldly grow the good, is having being good, if you like to think about that at that simple level, is actually becoming embedded in what we're trying to do with all of those stakeholders. And I think where we are in the world today, what's happening is our customers demand more sustainable, more thoughtful, more socially conscious products and services. Clearly, our employees are demanding that. They want to work for organizations that have purpose statements like yours. And all our communities are extended stakeholders, people who supply our products, people who use our products, are all thinking about the same thing. And so there is clearly an evolution that's probably been a few years in the making, but it feels like there's an inflection point this year that stakeholder capitalism and a broader definition of the mission of a corporation beyond doing things to achieve near-term shareholder value is real. And I'd have everyone think about it in as simple as those terms. What do your owners want? What do your customers want? What does your workforce want? There's a lot of alignment going on that they want something better than we've been able to deliver as a society for the last few years.
That's great. Bill, you often talk about the power of a company's purpose in business. At ServiceNow, in fact, your purpose is to make the world of work better for people. Why should institutions care about being purpose-driven?
And I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Bill.
I can hear you, Bill.
I could only get the beginning of your question for some reason. But if you guys can hear me, put your thumbs up, and then I'll take it from there. Okay.
Go for it.
You're interested in the power of purpose, and I'll just share with you because I think Manny's answer was very comprehensive. What we view as our purpose, which is to make the world of work better for people. And in this digital transformation age, Digital is obviously accelerated dramatically by COVID. There's been $3 trillion poured into digital transformation pre-COVID. There'll be another $7.5 trillion in the next few years. And what we're finding is that companies have to really focus on their purpose, and obviously focusing on their customers, their partners, and their shareholders is wrong. The question is, how do we keep it real with culture and our purpose? And we just feel like we have to stay very hungry and very, very humble and really keep our eye on the customer, because really where the value lies. Yes, we have to be responsible and we have to do all the right things. But we learned that in spite of $3 trillion that's been invested into transformation, only 1/4 of that is paying off. That's because these companies are so fragmented in systems and silos and processes that they never really join into one wide mission. And therefore, we believe it's our purpose to lead the workflow revolution and really help companies solve the digital transformation challenge. That's our purpose, make work better for people.
Thanks, Bill. Just a note for you, Bill. I think we had a bit of an echo on your comments. And I don't know if you're tied in twice into the call, either by phone and by video, but if you could take a quick look at that. Jose, some of the companies have talked about a movement to a more responsible, humane capitalism as somewhat punitive. That is, being compelled or forced to adopt policies and practices that serve external social goals with no direct benefit to the business or to shareholders. What ways that a more enlightened capitalism, in addition to advancing the common good, can serve more immediate interests of all of business key constituencies, including its owners?
Yeah, and I think Bill and Manny, summarize this pretty well. One, I would go back and say, look, the narrative has dramatically changed, especially in my world of kind of asset management and being an investment manager, where often our clients would come to us and say, well, look, we want to invest in a more sustainable way, but they'll be willing to pay a higher fee. And by the way, you're going to lose returns. Today, that dialogue, the narrative has changed. They're looking for lower fees and higher returns, and they're looking for this way of investing. And for us, it's that, what's also changed is the two are tied together, right? If you look at, we believe that, as an investment manager, one of the things we do as a fiduciary is we manage risks. These ESG-driven responsible investing types of risks, they're real risks, right? Whether it's climate change, whether it's the fires we see, whether it's social, whether it's good corporate governance, these are all things that could easily either help you improve value in your portfolio or destroy a lot of value. What we've done to that end is looked at our portfolio, and we've got into a place where 100% of the over $1 trillion we manage are informed by ESG risks in the investment process, right? So it's kind of, how do we kind of understand that? How do we do alpha testing to kind of show that this actually does improve your performance from a portfolio construction perspective? But then it's also about engagement and transparency, right? It's about how we engage with boards, how we vote on proxies, how we try to demand and require more accountability and transparency from the companies that we own. So again, I think the biggest shift here is that language around, hey, it's one or the other, and what really is your fiduciary duty? The reality is more and more what you're saying is the two are tied together.
Those are great thoughts. Bill, one of the themes we opened the discussion with was around technology and the impact of technology on how we're going to move forward and how digital engagement or digitally transformed enterprises are working today. Maybe you could share a little bit with us about, as you've been through the pandemic, and I'm sure before and during, how is the technology transforming the digital enterprise?
Absolutely, Dan. Digital transformation was the opportunity of a generation before COVID. I can remember going into a board meeting in March with my team, and we were going to do blue sky thinking of what we wanted to be when we grew up. And we came to the conclusion that if we don't help the world solve COVID problems, there may not be a blue sky. And what you're seeing today is old value chains are splitting apart, and they're reefing into these quote unquote new workflows go across organizations. I'll give you an example. today in COVID, you have people that are working remotely. Keep in mind, 75% of the workforce by 2025 be millennial generation people. They didn't want to be stuck in a pen in these offices before COVID, and now they absolutely will accept choice. Companies are hiring thousands of people that they never even met. So how are you going to hire them, on board them, and culturate them into your value system? Insist that they have a segment of one training. Everything is digital and at their fingertips, so they can get all the self-help services that they need. And that's the application of deep machine learning, AI, virtual agents, all things that are going to digitally make people's lives better. So before COVID, this was an absolute necessity. After COVID, you won't be able to attract, retain, or actually compete without the digital transformation platforms that require the most for all of us. And this is true for customers. I'll give you an example. In Desjardins Group, they basically took hundreds of disparate applications and grouped it all onto one platform with ServiceNow. They're saving millions and millions, but at the same time, they're getting better service to their customers. Their employees are fired up, and now they're in a position to give a Michelin 3-star experience to everyone. So you got to read it. It's a platform game, and everything has to be digital first.
Manny, let's go back to you. Similar conversation on technology and how it's impacted now your workforce, how you're working. We all were sharing a bit of stories prior to getting onto this call around how and where we're working. Maybe share a little bit about how your thinking's evolved on that.
Sure, Dan. Just on the impact of technology, and maybe I'll connect the dots to Bill's comments as well. We have found that I think all of us have found that work can be done quite effectively virtually, remotely. That's maybe a very small flavor of the digital transformation agenda that many companies have been on for arguably at least several years, maybe a decade, and Bill and others have led that through the enablement of enterprise software. This period during the pandemic has just advanced for all of us the reality of that how much can be actually done to faster with implications for your labor force, with implications for the environment potentially, and we think that'll accelerate. And we're all trying to figure out every chief executive I talk to, what is the model going to look like, post-COVID, assuming we get there at some point in the next few months. And if you tie this back to even ESG goals, as Jose said, this meeting could have been physical. It's now virtual. There's a carbon footprint impact. We're not flying people from all over the world to go to a location. We're also, so I think, connecting digital transformation to sustainability, environment, is a trend that we're just seeing is getting real and more real. Another thing that's related to ESG in the world we're facing with implications in jobs. Often one of the implications and both the opportunity for productivity in digital transformation is impact on labor and the workforce. In fact, many of the companies we work with understand, well, how this translates, how many people do I need? And the pandemic has actually, obviously, depending on what industry and affected your labor needs dramatically. If you're a ServiceNow versus an airline, it's a very different set of issues. But technology's impact on labor is something we will also be taking on over multiple years. And so we are looking at this world today where we know for many functions or companies, because of digital, we're able to deliver value to our customers, our clients, our people in a way that's still quite effective, actually faster, better. But it's not clear in the long run, can we connect the dots to achieving the mission behind you? Ultimately, can this be good and impact on the environment and impact on the overall workforce and impact on the global economy? I think we as leaders have work to do together to make sure it actually comes out right for the planet. You're on mute, Dan.
The most said words of 2020.
That's right. You can't have a good virtual connection without someone forgetting to turn their mute button off. I think there's some real interesting pieces around the advent of technology creating efficiency, but does it create inclusivity? And there's lots of aspects of that where you can see technology creating inclusivity. We can have more together. We could have events like this. It could be sustainable, whether it's on the environmental side or the social side. But at the same time, you think about automation software, you think about ways to do things, and it displaces workers out of the environment. Now, Jose, we didn't prep for this question, but I'm going to go to you next. As you think about that application of technology, and maybe on thread to where we are today around sustainability and some of the social dynamics, how are you thinking about that? How is it having implications as you look forward?
Look, I think Manny said it right. The word he used was, accelerated. And I think, I'm often asked, how has this pandemic or this environment kind of changed our strategy? And I say it hasn't changed it at all. It's just accelerated the trends that were behind it, right? In the asset management industry, for example, as you know, Dan, it's been around fee pressures, but it's also been about technology disruptors, right? And how are firms, on the asset management side going to grow? Now, on one end, I think you've seen tremendous adaptation of technology just in this past year, right? How many people upgraded their cameras? How many people upgraded their software and all this? And, across the board, probably would have taken 5 years to get the population to get to where it is. And I think where Bill sits is really at the vortex of kind of where the real value add is going to come. I look at asset managers. Is the value add really going to come from traditional portfolio managers, or is technology going to play a broader role in that? Interesting for us going into March and April and going work from home. Our immediate concerns were twofold. It's like, how do we engage with our clients now? And how do we engage with our employees? Well, we had to get a lot more digital. And from that, we found the highest level of engagement with our clients in the history of our firm, no matter how you measure it, right? So even though you talk about these things a lot, what you're seeing now in the application, there's a much better appreciation for, okay, hey, we can run our businesses this way. We need to kind of quickly accelerate what we're doing from a technology perspective. Another example, one of our big platforms and businesses, the U.S. wealth side and retail channels. Well, we made a decision this year to go to a hybrid model, right? We typically had external wholesalers and internal, right? The days of people calling into home offices, bringing donuts or bagels and knocking on doors every day. Well, guess what? That is not the future, right? But it was still hanging on. This year, we said, look, we're going to go to a hybrid model, and we're pulling back from that. And we're going to get more digital. And guess what? We're going to touch more people than we did before. And our clients, because they're also working from home, they're also appreciating this nuance. And I think, another thing Manny touched on this is like, I don't know what the world's going to look like when we go back. I do believe we'll be back in offices to some extent in some way. But I also think we're going to change our behaviors. It would not have been unusual for me to go to Korea for a 25-minute meeting for some important business. I don't think I'm going to be doing that going forward. And this is really going to accelerate what's happening on the technology side. We all believed it was going to be disruptors to most of our businesses. I think you could put that to a multiple of 4 going forward.
I agree with you. I was laughing. I could see Manny laughing offline, and Bill, I think you were smiling. I suspect we were all global warriors on the plane. I used to go to China 4 times a year, Europe, 10 times a year. And in 20, I think I'm at 1 or 2 each, and that's it. And so, I'm going to have
to give up my concierge key cards or the many different flyer cards I have.
My wife may or may not appreciate that we've had dinner together most nights for the last 7 or 8 months. I'm usually on the road 3 weeks of the month, so it's very different, and it's probably good on some dimensions for sure.
So why don't I layer a thread through here, because I think there's an interesting one to go to, which is, how is ESG impacting your business and your business strategies? And what are you changing or not changing? I think when we first went into the pandemic, I can speak from my personal vantage point, it's a very high priority. It slipped way down. I was into survive mode as opposed to thrive mode, and now we're back on using that to accelerate. Bill, maybe I'll go to you first. As you start to think about both the ESG, and you could use E or S on that. You could put the G in there. I think there's a broader conversation going on beyond just environment today. How has that accelerated your thinking? How are you thinking about that over the next little while?
Sure, and I think Manny on the industry and Jose on the acceleration of digital transformation. Things that would normally have taken 3 or 4 years to happen in 3 or 4 months. There's no choice. So how we're thinking about, and I'll just give you one example. When COVID first hit, to be relevant, we felt that we had to have emergency response, track and trace, and provide open source applications for free to the global economy. But then that manifested itself in this idea of emergency response turning into return to work safely. Because I totally agree that the world is going to be a hybrid environment, and the office of the future is going to be a computer, it's going to be a phone. It's a tool. And where it's people more productive, it gives them the creative thinking. It lets them collaborate in a personal team orientation, albeit around safety and social distancing and PPE inventory management and people being mentally and physically up to coming in. Those things now have digital, and CEOs and people who are running companies have to account for that. And the world would be pretty litigious against those that don't. So we really pivoted there. And if you think about it, just think about moments that just happened. Defying the idea of physics and time with digital transformation. At a collaboration layer, you could be using anything from Zoom to Teams to WebEx, and all that seamlessly has to integrate back to the people in your enterprise, so you can take these conversations and immediately activate them. Similarly, CEOs and leaders of business have invested heavily in these systems of record in the 20th century, and they said themselves, my goodness, I have so much money into it, and I'm getting so little out of it. Why is that? Because everything is trapped in a database to a functional silo in a world where everyone has to work together in teams in this new reality. And this is not going away. In fact, it's going to even accelerate. So I think that there's impact clearly on the environment, because if you just take some of the environmental savings of us behaving totally different and times that across your whole company, think of the T&E line in most companies now, and the margin leverage that most companies are getting from saving on all those things that were very harmful to the environment. On the social side, while we see digital taking off, we also see a lot of social unrest with those that are coming along right and those that are getting behind. And more, it's kind of like you have to really focus now on diversity, inclusion, and belonging with people. Someone said to me, well, what does that mean? For us, for example, in the United States in particular, there was tremendous unrest in the Black community. We had to completely rethink how we recruit, how we promote, how we make sure pay is fair and equitable. I don't mean 99 cents on a dollar. I mean dollar on a dollar. And then ultimately the ecosystem that you have to build with universities and even trade schools to get people who normally could have been left behind into the modern workforce. And then finally on goods. Every company right now, let's say financial services as an example, in a highly regulated environment. They have to be resilient. They have to be sustainable. Their processes have to be proof, and they have to do that in a complete digital way. And I just want to give you one final example that I think is kind of striking. If you take Disney, in the heart of the COVID environment, no theme parks, no cinema, yet the stock is at an all-time high. And what we learned in working with Disney is they had to completely reinvent the business model. So you can sign up for Disney Plus, everything's self-service. When you're signing up for your subscription, if you're having trouble, a virtual agent comes and helps you. And then if you need a human, a workflow order is issued. Human could be anywhere in the economy, could be any time zone. They're the one that has the power to make whatever decision the AI operation within the platform decided has to make the call to make the customer happy and sign up for the service. Now they're taking off like it's unbelievable. And there's an example of digital transformation equals business model innovation. With that growth, that high stock price, how many more people can they hire? How much more inclusive can they be? So I think a lot of this is tied to making businesses winners.
There's a lot of good threads to pull on there, Bill. Jose, I was going to go to you. You're sitting on the investor side of this, the vanguard of people changing strategy. How are you guys adapting then to this key theme going through our society, our businesses today around ESG?
And this has kind of been near and dear to our DNA for the better half of 5 decades, right? But what we're seeing now is massive acceleration, and I call it the perfect storm of whether it's your shareholders and stakeholders, whether it's your clients or your employees. All three have kind of come together, really demanding more transparency, more action around these things. Again, for us on the business side, requests we get for information or RFPs, over 70% of them are asking these questions, right? Things that, certain parts of our business were key, like real assets and alternatives and infrastructure, where we did this already. Now it might be our fixed income manager that manages investment grade bonds. They have to respond to these things, and firms are quickly trying to figure out how do they catch up to, to the language around this and what clients want. Greenwashing, a lot harder to do today, because whether it's consultants that are out there, regulators, everyone's jumping in here trying to understand these issues and a real view that these things are real risks. I think the other thing that's impacting our business is the people side, right? It's what we saw with George Floyd earlier in the year, these inequalities going on around the world, is it's empowered employees in a different way. We've held courageous conversations, and folks are more dare to speak out. I think something Bill mentioned, which is probably the most important thing for leaders in corporate America, is you have to rethink how you do things, right? If you think about diversity and inclusion, and you often hear the pools are not big enough and it's hard, you can't go fishing in the same ponds. How you recruit, how you run your business, and I know in Bill's world, obviously in tech, you have to constantly do that. A lot of us in financial service are not used to that dynamic change of kind of how we think and being quicker and more nimble. And that, I think, is an absolute importance. I think the other way it's impacted our business is that it's also brought to light a lot of inequities, right? I think if you go back to the work from home environment, it was, for financial services in general, it was very easy to work from home. I mean, you held your breath because you had never done it to that scale, but largely very doable. But then when you sat there and said, well, myself and my team, I'm like, I'm just going to work from home and I've got a backyard and I can go outside. Yet we may make folks that needed to come into the mailroom still take the subway to work and come into the office. That doesn't feel very good, right? It might be the ability of having internet and technology here versus our offices in India, for example. These are all things that have forced us as leaders to address wow, how do we respond to a George Floyd situation? How do we engage our employees? How do we deal with the inequities within our own business of how we have to manage? And I think it's going to take a different kind of leader, and one that is, really quickly able to adapt and change.
So let's pull on that for a second, Jose. So what did you actually do? So we had the social unrest of the summer. I think all of us can comment on this. I think we all had responses to it. Why don't we just pull on that a little bit on, what did you guys do? How did you do it? And let's go to a bit of a thread, which is, was it good for business or you just needed to do it?
Well, I think it's both. I think it was absolutely needed to be done. And it's also very good for business because you end up becoming more relevant and more informed, which means, in my world, it's a people business. So you're going to attract and retain your top talent by doing this. And one of the first things we did, which I found extremely powerful, was this. It was something as simple as courageous conversations. Starting with myself, the CEO of our parent, Roger Ferguson, getting in the mix and addressing the firm, and it's telling stories that we never told. And if I call myself out as a person of color in the C-suite, I typically would hide from these issues because if I felt self-serving, if I talked about diversity, and then one of these things are like, oh, that's not where I want to show myself. And very quickly realizing how wrong I was. And I learned that from watching Roger and seeing him step up as a leader and tell stories around trying to hail a cab in New York City or coming up, working and being a student in Harvard and some of the things he felt maybe just out in the world, that people were like, wow, had no idea you experienced this as well. Me hearing stories from some of our employees, and I've even seen this in my personal life with neighbors coming up and saying, help me understand, this was shocking to me. So just the sense of having those discussions, and then that leading to putting together an inclusion council, engaging broad of our ERGs or employment resource groups coming into the mix. And then it was having conversations with our clients as well and asking them, here's what we're doing. What are you doing? Back to Bill's point, it was rethinking how we did the process, recognizing, a lot of times when we recruit people, we have a diverse set of candidates, but our interviewers were not diverse. Or ultimately, even if they were, it still came down to a manager making the ultimate decision without any accountability or question, and there being bias in the mix. So again, I think conversations is key. This is a top-down issue. Another thing, I heard someone say that it's really rung true to me. Like, we have a head of diversity and inclusion in our firm, but someone said, hey, that's the worst thing a firm can do, because your head of diversity and inclusion should be your CEO if you're really going to take the lead. And I'm not saying we're going to get rid of ours, but it really kind of rang the bell to me and say, yeah, you know what? This has to be a top-down approach.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in here, Dan, on the same topic. Yep. If we'll pick up on this thread, because I felt here in this country anyway, the events around Juneteenth were a transformational inflection point around ESG broadly, and so maybe offer up what we did just if to the extent it works. There's a lot we chose to do internally. Jose has mentioned that. I'll come back to that as well. But the way we had thought about ESG a little bit, the way most companies have thought about it, is one dimension: be good corporate citizens. That is, do the right things in sustainability, be carbon neutral. This year sign up to net zero carbon by 2030, etc. Try to build diversity. We've all been on the women's agenda, the gender agenda, the people of color agenda for many years. And then on the side, be perhaps with charities, be good people. Every organization, there's HP and there's Packard Foundation, there's Dell versus the MSD Foundation. We were giving away 2% of our capacity pro bono to charitable endeavors around education or environment. For us as a company, the commitments we made on Juneteenth were that beyond role modeling this for ourselves and being good citizens in our volunteers and our pro bono work, it has to be built into the core of what we do, right? And so, and that's a little bit in the investment business, making sure there's ESG metrics. For the consulting business, to the extent we're a vanguard, if this is now a top priority for chief executives or core clients, it has to be a product and capability of the Bains of the world. And so just like a couple of years ago, building up a sustainability practice to actually say diversity is a strategic issue. It's not an optional issue. It matters to your customers. It matters to your people. So actually stand up and say, how do we build a diversity practice to help our client base, and then find specific places. So, one thing that we're proud of on this topic, last Friday, a large number of organizations here in the U.S. announced this initiative called 110, to hire 1 million sustaining Black jobs over the next decade, and to actually put resources against that issue as an example, using core strategic consulting, startup, investing capabilities, behind the leaders of that, Ken Frazier of Merck and Ken Chenault, ex-American Express, and Ginny Rometty, et cetera, on this issue of how do we make a difference. To actually change this, we have to role model as companies doing the right things inside our walls, but we have to be able to advance it with our customers. And now what's also happening, I'm curious on how Bill would see this, is we view this ESG thing as some people say it's the next digital, meaning 5+ years ago, every company said we need to go through a digital transformation. And Jose, right? People had chief digital officers or chief digital transformation officers. That's left the norm now because technology is infused into every. The impact of ESG and what is the overlap of ESG with the digital agenda. I think is a second order question that people are now asking, wrestling with. I don't know if my technology's just disappeared here, but because I lost you on screen, but I will.
We can hear you though, Manny.
Yeah, we can hear you fine, Manny. You're.
But I think you got the drift. That's sort of where we're headed, and now I won't belabor everything we've done internally. I would say if you're going to, if you're a Bain and Company.
Oh, I think we lost you, Manny, there for a sec. Maybe I'm going to take
ServiceNow. If you're going to be the world's consultant in digital transformation or partner, you better be very advanced in running the company in a digitally transformed way. And I think that's the mission and the agenda we have. And I agree with Jose. While we will have a chief diversity officer, it's job one of the CEO.
I was going to, for the audience's benefit, remind everyone the conversation we started off with. The topic for the session was a responsible and more humane capitalism. I think you just got a great session with all three of these leaders about how they're actually thinking, running, and the issues they solved and looked after in 2020. And I think it's actually quite a shout out around this concept of a more humane capital. We're all running big businesses, lots of employees, lots of clients, lots of outputs. One thing I wanted to do is I wanted to go back to one of the opening comments we had around stakeholder and how do we define our stakeholder. And historically, companies, CEOs they may have focused internally on issues like we're talking about now. And now I think they're starting to go external and, standing up, being accounted for on there. So maybe just as a concept, let's talk about the role of the company and its role as an advocate. And how do you see that evolving or not evolving? And I suspect we have, similar but different perspectives. Bill, I was going to go back to you first.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'll just try to build on the great points that Jose and Manny have already made. I really do believe that diversity is kind of a fact. You can report out on it, but inclusion is really a choice. And the leaders of the future are the ones that not only have made that choice, but are doing things that are highly measurable from the choice they make. So for one, what is that impact on the environment? What is social standing of a company? How do you govern to avoid things like bad conduct, corruption, harassment, security flaws, protecting data, looking after the customer's interests before that of you? All those things are absolutely essential for leaders. But I think one of the topics that Jose brought up is storytelling. I'll never forget having an all hands meeting. And, we do them on Zoom, probably like you guys do. And, we have 13,000 people joining us on a Monday, on a Saturday. I got a very emotional letter from one of our Black employees in the United States and just felt disconnected with everything that was going on. And I really called him up, very emotional conversation. I said, look, I've got the mic on Monday, and I'm going to hand you. I want you to tell stories. And it's all in the storytelling. One woman moved when she was 7 years old from Chicago to Miami. She moves into a house in Miami that, by the way, the neighbors protested that they could even get that, but eventually the town gave in. Lo and behold, several weeks later, she realized that the family that protested the strongest was led by her second grade teacher. And you just hear soul-crushing stories like that. And it just obviously opens up your heart. And it enables people to feel safe telling the story. But more importantly, it gives you the absolute platform for change. And in our case, that has to happen at the board of directors. That has to happen on the executive management team. That has to happen with all the processes as you recruit, promote, train, lobby for good, and obviously make sure that everybody's being fairly and adequately compensated for their effort. All this is measurable and repeatable. So I think one passionate plea for everyone could be think about how you're going to deal with ESG, how you're going to report out on it, and how you're going to create a movement around it within the company. Because as colleagues, Manny and Ray have said, it's not only the right thing to do, but it's actually really good business.
You're on mute.
My apologies. And so over to you on similar thought process, internal versus external. How loud do you want to be?
Well, look, I think to me, this starts with there's 2 points. One, it goes right back to our fiduciary duties, right, which is to protect our enterprise and value proposition. It's not unusual for you to hear CEOs talk very loudly on why we need more, we may need stimulus coming into this economy. We on my side, we may be fighting for what, policy is happening from a retirement perspective, because it impacts our business. But, in these issues are critical to our business. They're critical to the future of our business. So this should not be viewed any different. I think that, again, that dialogue and that narrative is absolutely changing. And I think the last point here, it's capitalism, right? It's becoming relevant in your business. I met with a recent client, a financial advisor, a large one. He put it pretty simply: firms who are not doing this well from the top down, you're just not going to get the money. It's that simple. This is about the demographics of clients. I mean, one stat that always blew me away. We recently kind of surveyed a bunch of high net worth individuals, population, and I was shocked to see that like 54% of them wanted to see their portfolios move into more sustainable management. But when you looked at the millennials, it was 94%. So again, shareholders, employees, clients, this now is about your fiduciary duty. It's about staying relevant as a business, and it is just table stakes. And I will tell you, the firms who do it well will pull ahead. The ones who don't, you will see fall behind.
And one thing, maybe, Jose, I'll just add on the capitalism thought. In a big chunk of, we do a lot of work for clients in the private equity space. And if you track how that investing asset class has also moved here, where in the past you might have you might have contributed your billions after you've made it to charitable foundations. And then you started building some asset classes on the side. Impact funds. Mm-hmm. There's very large environmental funds getting raised right now. To where it's really evolved is that most of the major private capital funds are putting ESG metrics into core measurement for the core funds, because it's good business, because it's what the customers of the portfolio companies demand, and it's because what the workforce requires. And for many industries, ours included, your company is only as good as your ability to hire talent to join you and to stay. And this is just a huge theme, and that makes this real and not a fad.
Manny, I'm going to stay with you for a second, because I think you just tweaked on an interesting conversation, which is about corporate behavior. And in the conversations that are out today, and Jose, you'd feel this, I think, Bill, this concept of companies that don't perform well, should they be incented to do better behavior, or should they be penalized? And there's a real interesting thread, lots of debates. It's easy to see it on, fossil fuel companies is an easy one to bring up. But we're starting to see it in other places, penalties on governance. You don't have the right gender mix, or you don't have the right racial mix. You obviously give a very complex advisory practice. What are you seeing in the practice? What do people seem to advocate for? And we'd have a very different feel between a regulator and a company. But
yeah, I think I get the question, Dan. I'll start editorializing an individual vantage point that still believes in free markets and capitalism. That the best way to incent behavior is that doing the right thing is in the interest of the organization in multiple ways. And I think that's essentially what is happening today. I think it's finally catching up. It's a long way to go. The question on regulation, what's the balance of the carrot and the stick, or the reward and the penalty, I will say that most of our clients actually have to anticipate that and plan for it. And so whether organizations are getting more purposeful in a different way and actually trying to influence that, I think that's a given. That's happening. People understand that regulatory frameworks matter, that in many cases, no matter how free market capitalist you are, that having the right set of rules, the right set of incentives, do matter. And on all of these topics, when there are a lot of short-term forces, there are short-term incentives that are probably in the wrong direction from what the right long-term behavior is. Getting the right regulatory constructs are right. And I think most companies have to invest some time being part of the dialogue. So I'll probably leave it as that. But
I think Manny said a couple of things that I would add on to that. That one, again, it's important kind of what a regulatory body does versus kind of the governance side and what businesses do. I would keep those separate because again, regulators play a different role. And also kind of a big part of what's at play here is kind of that short-term behavior versus long-term. That's where the biggest gray area is, because I think when you think about the long-term, it's pretty self-explanatory and there's very little debate. But to your key question then around needing to influence, yeah, we absolutely do, because we influence in almost every other aspect that we feel is critical to our business today. Like I said, you go down the line, there are things that really matter to Bill and his business, and Manny as well. And you better believe whether it's through our PACs, whether it's through lobbying and certain things, we're very loud because it's kind of important to our business. So I think we have to be part of that discussion. The question is, to me, on my side of the world, it's about influencing. It's about transparency and trying to find accountability. I'll give you one example of a recent announcement that somewhat controversial, right? With what Adina did over with the NASDAQ and saying, hey, requesting more disclosure around diversity with potentially a penalty of delisting. Well, the reality there, it gets blamed on both ends because it's okay, 4 years it could take to do it. And by the way, you're not really going to delist the people. You're just asking them to be transparent. I applaud what they did because, again, they're taking an approach. It's not saying we're going to not go to a quota system. We're simply saying, help us understand your numbers. You may say, I can't disclose because of other legal reasons, or here's what we're trying to do. But it is forcing that conversation to hold firms accountable that if you have a firm that in its history has never had a single woman or person of color on their board, they should at least be able to try to explain why. Like, tell us why and have that dialogue. And on our side, we know that is not good, not just for society. It's not good for the economy. It's probably not good for these businesses in the long term. If that business is in our portfolio, we want to understand why they're doing that. So that whole engagement is critical. And as capital allocators, we have an ability to influence, and we do it for our own benefit because we want to improve our portfolios.
I think that's a great perspective. Bill, anything to add?
I would say I think Manny and Jose covered it. The markets are very efficient. So the capital markets will handle this. Companies that don't do the right thing or can't report on these kinds of accomplishments not be interesting. Customers also expect that the way a company comports themselves on the environment, on society, on their governance practices are going to be more important as they consider various procurement decisions and RFP type decisions. So this is just going to be, a wave of change that's hitting markets all over the world. And I think the markets will be highly efficient on companies choose not to participate, or that for one reason or another haven't participated. So it's not a matter of will they? No, they will. It's just a question of how fast they can. And I also think, this comment, the war for talent, and I think that the war for talent is absolutely on. And then I also think the fuse of time is on for this particular ESG type of transformation. And the companies that get there first will own markets, and the ones that are last movers are going to be real laggards. It's going to be very bad for them.
I was trying to think of the last wrap-up topic for us to go through. Why don't we do a quick little survey? I think we've got 2 or 3 minutes left. Optimistic in the next 2-3 years, cautious. How do you feel about the world we live in, where we're going, and your prospects for you and your firms within that world? Bill, I'll go for you.
Extremely optimistic. I do believe that 2020 will go down as one of the tougher years on some different dimensions, but it also pointed to incredible creativity, innovation within business and its ability to adjust to so many different challenges. So I think a lot has been learned and a lot will scale forward. In our case, in terms of our company, one of the things I did mention is, really believe in the power of AI. And there's a company that we acquired a couple of weeks ago named Element AI. And this is run by and founded by a Turing Award winner, which is like the Nobel Peace Prize for AI. And when you think about research, you think about development, you think about product innovation, and so much of a company's strength will be determined, especially in tech, by their ability to complement people, technology, and no technology will be more influential on human condition by taking away the soul-crushing, paper-based administrative tasks from people so they can focus on empathy and decision-making and moving come forward. I believe the AI revolution around how work is done had only just begun and will be front and center. And so I couldn't possibly be more optimistic on ServiceNow and actually on the world. I do believe the world will learn a lot in 2020 and it'll go up in 2020, 2021 and beyond. I'm very optimistic.
Jose.
I'm with Bill on this. I'm very optimistic right now. I'm optimistic on the world. I'm optimistic, and that's because what I see. We've had multiple inflection points throughout our history. I think this is another one. You're seeing people a lot more empowered. There's a lot more awareness. So that whole narrative is something I feel more optimistic about today than I ever have before. I think for my business, for the economy, I'm also optimistic. I mean, I think our view going forward is more of a, very dark tunnel, bright light, right? So it's like there is a bright light out there, but you got to get through this dark tunnel first, and there will continue to be uncertainty. We'll have to manage volatility and low rates in a way that we haven't over the last decade plus. But I think, one of the challenges for me, and I'm sure, Manny and others, especially in the financial area, and, Bill's in the middle of this. Again, he mentioned AI. He said, technology is going to disrupt many industries. And I am sure my industry in itself is going to look very different 10 years from now in terms of where the real value at. I think, Manny mentioned it, having a digital officer and these things that are just going to be the norm. The same way we talked about ESG, there won't be ESG products because it's just going to be the norm. And it's going to be the top leaders and the CEOs are the ones that are able to adopt their businesses quick enough in a way that, we have not had, in Bill's world, yes. In my world, I think, that hasn't been a muscle that's been built.
That's great. And Manny, a closing comment.
Yeah, I think my video has been frozen, but I've heard everything. So I'll probably share. I'm very optimistic for us as a business and our types of businesses where we understand, we've been able to not just understand digital transformation, benefit from it. And this has been actually quite a very good year. And the forecasts the next few years are very strong. I'm probably cautiously optimistic of what it means for the whole world. I do think the level of understanding, awareness, commitment from the top of the boardrooms to the frontline employees on that ESG matters, that we all have a responsibility, shared responsibility, not just to have our companies go well, but our communities and our countries and our planet do well in the next few years. That's the reason I'm cautiously optimistic. Everybody gets it. It's cautious just because there are a lot of issues to work through, and we can't ignore that. But the fact that everybody has a higher level of commitment that I've ever seen to maybe do the thing that's in the words right behind your head, Dan, I think gives me optimism.
That's great. Well, that's time for us. Let me thank my panelists. You guys did an outstanding job. You brought a lot of clarity and thought to this process. I think we really brought to light our topic about a more humane capitalism and some of the global leaders thinking about these issues, how live they are, and I think they just put it on display for you about the new way to think and the new way to act. So thank you all. Enjoy your day. Great panel, great panelists, and we appreciate the time.